Hello and welcome to Built to Go, a van life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time it's episode 251, and we're going to talk about some rather unpleasant stuff. You know, sometimes everything is not going so well, and this might just be one of those times, and yeah, we have to talk about it. We're also going to talk about a great app that we don't really have access to anymore. I will discuss a product review of a USB tester that you might not have ever thought of, and a tale from the road involving, well, a bad situation that was made better by the good hearts of people. And my intro went way too long, and folks, I'm late again. I apologize. This week has been just remarkably busy, and I don't know how my life got busy like this. I mean, I'm here talking about van life. I'm supposed to be out in the van down by the river. Yeah, that has not been my life of late, and it's getting in the way of the podcast, which seems unacceptable, and I appreciate your patience. So, folks, is it safe to come to the U.S. now? Well, I'm going to look at one article here, and we will discuss it, and then I will move on with some other things here. So this is one article's opinion, and this was written by a gentleman by the name of Forrest Brown, who happens to be with CNN. And he compiled a list of recommendations from other countries for people coming to the U.S. to see what they think about if it's safe to actually travel here. In more or less alphabetical order, Australia says officially to exercise normal safety precautions in the United States of America, but it does warn that the United States has more violent crime than Australia, and gun crime is possible in all areas. And they encourage Australian visitors to learn active shooter drills if they live in the United States, which is something that, if you're not from the United States, you may not know. All of our schools teach active shooter drills in school, just like fire drills are taught everywhere else. Moving on from there, we have Canada, also advising take normal security precautions, and also warning about the same thing. Lots of violence, avoid the borders at night, things like that. Okay, United Kingdom, very similar. They publish an active shooter guide, which, you know, is something that is a very American phenomenon. They caution about the U.S.-Mexico border, which can be dangerous, but generally they think it's safe. Israel warns that there's a rise in anti-Semitic incidents, but still think on a scale of 1 to 4, which is what they use, the U.S. is a 1, which is ordinary precautions. France warns specifically about urban areas and an increase in carjackings. So, for example, for some reason, they single out Boston. They say, avoid traveling alone at night, on foot, and avoid parts of Dorchester, Mattapan, and Roxbury, which is not how we actually pronounce those things in Boston. They also warn about Atlanta, and specifically to avoid the city center and to take taxis at night. Mexico has something very interesting to say. They say historical, racial, and ethnic tension, including opposition to immigration, have led to attacks by violent extremist groups, Mexican citizens, to avoid large crowds in the United States. Japan says this, and this is a quote, "It is important to recognize that the security situation is very different between the United States and Japan, and to understand what kind of crime victims are at high risk and in what areas." And then they specifically mention gun crime, and they ask all of their citizens that when they find a place to stay in the United States that they find security exits, and they have an evacuation plan, and they give instructions about how to secure a room and how to mute your cell phone and all that kind of thing. This little piece here, if a Japanese tourist can't escape or hide, they're advised to throw objects nearby at the criminal or use them as weapons. New Zealand placed the U.S. at level 2 out of 4, which is exercise increased caution due to the threat of terrorism. And it also adds, violent crime has targeted individuals and groups from the LGBTQIA plus community and those with diverse ethnic, cultural, and religious backgrounds. It also suggests that people from New Zealand should research where they're going in the United States before they travel. And so that's just a collection of what some other countries are saying about visits to the U.S. But here's the thing. That article is from 2023. That is not current. That is what the situation was in 2023 when we thought things were relatively normal. I mean, okay, we were coming out of COVID, but the United States was still the United States. Arguably, that has changed. Since January 20th, the United States has become a different place. Things are tense here. Things are changing rapidly and not for the better, according to the opinions of, it seems, most people. And there have been incidents at the border that have been pretty horrific. We've had people try to come to the U.S., and for a variety of reasons, they've been detained, sometimes for weeks. They have been moved around with little communication with the outside world. People didn't know where they were. And there's often not really good justification for this. In some of the cases, the people didn't have the proper documentation. But even then, why don't they just turn people away? Why are they putting them in detention camps? So there have been an increase of those incidents, at least according to the media. So here's the problem with trying to figure this stuff out. Once there is one incident of any type on any subject, and the media sees interest in that topic, they will then promote anything else that's even close to try to keep your interest. We noticed that earlier this year with the tragic plane crash in Washington, D.C., which was unusual. Air travel is incredibly safe, and fatal air accidents of commercial flights have been at an all-time low. And yet, suddenly it looked like every plane was falling out of the sky. Look at this. Plane crash here, plane crash here, plane crash here. But when you look at the statistics, there really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I mean, yes, there was that one tragic incident, but there are so many planes flying that there are always plane incidents. So these truly horrific stories at the border don't really tell us whether it's safe to come here or not, because you have to figure just how many people are crossing the border. And it's a lot. I mean, just between the U.S. and Mexico, about 1 million people cross every day. 1 million people a day, and that is legal crossing. We're not talking about illegal immigration or migrants or anything like that. That is just legal crossings at the border. And the U.S.-Canada border, about 400,000 people cross that every day. So there's masses of people coming to the U.S., and it's really hard to know from a few stories of bad things happening if that means there's a trend or if anybody coming through is in danger or whatever. But now let's look to today. What are countries saying today about travel to the U.S.? And a lot of them have just updated things. So Canada, of course, things are tense between the U.S. and Canada. I am 58 years old. I've never seen things this tense between Canada and the U.S. This is rather extraordinary, and I can't say that I blame Canada for being upset when our president has suggested that they be annexed and become a state. It's a very provocative statement, and one that I think most countries would bristle at, and in fact, well, Panama and Greenland through Denmark, they're a little upset about similar claims too. So hey, look, I'll tell you, things are very tense here. So Canada has been responding as best they can, and they've just issued this new travel advisory in response to changes that the U.S. government has taken for people coming from Canada to the U.S., and I'm going to read a summary here, but this all takes place on April 11th. So if you are in Canada and you're thinking of coming to the U.S. after April 11th, there's very important things you need to know about. And the thing to remember is you need to fill out an I-94 admission form. This form is brand new. It's another layer of bureaucracy. And basically it states that if you're coming to the U.S. for more than 30 days, which many snowbirds do, which van life people do, RVers, all these folks will come to the U.S. for more than 30 days. Students, all those folks, you have to register with the U.S. government using this I-94, and you can find that information on the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website. But the thing is, if you don't fill out that form and you accidentally overstay your welcome, you can have fines and misdemeanor prosecution, and you might be one of those folks that just happens to go spend 6 weeks in a detention center somewhere. And the part here that the Canadian government really wants to emphasize is, if you don't fill out this form and the U.S. government detains you or fines you or whatever, the Canadian government can't help you in any way, shape, or form. Also, when you're crossing the border from Canada into the U.S., you may be asked more questions. They will ask you perhaps what your residence is, what your employment is, what your educational ties are, and they may ask if you have enough money to cover your stay in the U.S. So I would say that coming to the U.S. from Canada now is more difficult and more risky than it ever has been in my life. I think that's pretty safe to say. Denmark issued a special travel advisory warning transgender and non-binary travelers to contact the U.S. Embassy before coming to the United States. And that's because the United States has officially removed the possibility that someone is transgender. They basically have said there's no such thing. And all documentation must say male or female, based on a very strange definition about the large and small reproductive cell. I have taken a lot of biology in college, and I would say that that is a very poor definition of male and female. But the bottom line is that if you are somebody who has an X designation on your documents, as many Americans do, by the way, you may not be given entry into the United States. That's tricky. Finland and France issued similar warnings along the same lines. And I will say this as my opinion: if you are non-binary, or, and I hate to say this, even if you look non-binary, this is not a great time to come to the U.S. We've had a few incidents now where women with short hair wearing traditional male clothing have gone to the bathroom and been accosted and even arrested because they are, quote unquote, in the wrong bathroom. It's a pretty serious problem here. So, folks, if you happen to be trans or non-binary in any way, the U.S. is not a welcoming place for you right now, and I find that tragic. The U.K. and Germany are warning that travelers coming to the U.S. must comply with all entry rules, which are getting more complex. And they have also added that if you have a visa, that may not be enough. You can do everything right, come to the U.S. with a visa, and you can still be detained, which has happened to people. Again, the numbers are not significant. When you're looking at this many people moving across the borders, there have not been significant numbers of people detained. But that number has not been zero. And it is a concern. So that's what the countries are saying. Now, at me, as somebody living in the U.S. right now, in March of 2025, I think this is not the year to visit the U.S. If you are not from the U.S. and you want to visit our amazing national parks and try food in all of our great cities and all, the U.S. has a lot to offer. There's no doubt about that. I do not think this is the year to do it. Not only are things getting tense at the border because of our government and the statements they're making and the changes they're making, the citizenry is very polarized and getting very, very angry. It is the consensus among many of my friends who are smart folks, have various different educational qualifications, and we're pretty sure that this summer in the U.S., we're going to see violence in the streets that we haven't seen since the 1960s. I don't say this to be alarmist. I'm certainly not wanting this to happen, but all of the precursors are there for such violence to happen. We're already seeing violence at Tesla dealerships, and I think that is just the very beginning. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we don't. I hope we have a very peaceful summer. I think we're definitely going to see protests no matter what, but I hope those protests can not only remain peaceful, but I hope they can have an effect. Hello, Editing Jeff here. I started thinking about this piece a long time ago. Well, I mean, a week ago, which these days seems like a long time. Since then, something has happened that hadn't happened when I started writing this, and that is the case of Rumeysa Ozturk, who's 30 and is a PhD student at Tufts, and she had written an article criticizing Tufts University's policies on how they were handling the situation in Gaza. That's what we know right now. And a couple of days ago, as she was breaking fast for Ramadan, she went to meet some friends, and she was literally grabbed off the street by men and women, as it happened, dressed in black with covered faces, and she was taken off to an unmarked car and whisked away. And it took a while, but we found out that they took her from Somerville, Massachusetts to New Orleans and put her in a detention center. And it is true that she is not a citizen. She doesn't have the same rights as citizens, but she was here on a lawful visa and was snatched up and taken away. Some would say kidnapped. That is a thing that has happened in the U.S. this week, and it's not an isolated story. Okay, we shall continue. So, should you visit the U.S.? I think you should make your own decision based on all the information that's available to you. And if you wish to contact me and get my opinion on anything specific, on specific cities, etc., I'm happy to give you my experiences. But it's pretty scary here right now, honestly. And while this podcast isn't about politics, and we're not going to talk about politics, at some point politics becomes reality, and I'm afraid to say that that's where we are now. I don't think you can have a podcast that talks about anything like this and not talk about politics, because politics is affecting everything. And I wish it wasn't. There's a lot of cool things going on right now, and I really wish we could be talking about planning the summer and visiting all the national parks, except, oh no, you can't because they don't have enough staff. Or, going and camping out on that beach, and oh, you can't because of the anti-homelessness rulings, etc., etc., etc. I am bitterly disappointed to be talking about this, but I think it's essential. So I'll just leave it there. And again, if anyone has any questions about maybe coming to the U.S. and what to expect and some advice or whatever, go ahead and drop me a line at jeff@built2go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. And I will give you the best advice that I can. But at the end of the day, I would like you to stay safe. And I'd really like to thank Jason and Mr. Rose for generously supporting this podcast by visiting buymeacoffee.com/built2go, where they have purchased some diesel for me, and that helps keep ads off the podcast, so they're doing me a favor and doing you a favor too. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit buymeacoffee.com/built2go and buy me a gallon of diesel, and a special thank you to those of you who donate every month. I really appreciate it. Let's move on to the news, which I'm sure will be much more uplifting than the last section. All right, maybe not. Actually, this might be the biggest news of the podcast here. So if you're in the U.S. and you're traveling across the country, and a lot of us do this, I know people do it today, it's not uncommon to not know where you're going. I mean, you'll have a vague idea, but you may not know where you're going to stay that night. And so, you'll wake up in the morning and you do your coffee ritual, and you're kind of looking out at the beautiful vista or the wall and dumpster of a Walmart parking lot, as the case may be. And you think, where should I go today? So you whip out your phone and you go to iOverlander, and then you click, and then it doesn't work because they killed iOverlander. Before you panic here, they killed the original app. The original iOverlander app no longer works, and this has been in the works for months, and I haven't been paying attention to it because I haven't been on the road in so long. But yeah, the original iOverlander app is gone. There's now an iOverlander 2, which has all kinds of great new features, and I think the general consensus is it's terrible. Remember, this is the premier van life app in the US. This is the app that everybody uses, and right now on the App Store on iOS, it has a rating of 1.9. 1.9, that is not a good rating. And the reason is that they took something that worked, that everybody loved, and added a bunch of features that nobody asked for, and then put in ads and a paywall, and they fundamentally changed the way the app works. Now you have to download content to see what's available everywhere you go. And for those of us who travel long distances, it's kind of a pain. And some people in the comments or the reviews have commented that now they have to worry about data when they're using the app, because if they're, say, in the middle of the country and they're looking at places to go, they have to download repeatedly where they're going to go. And if you don't pay them $60 a year, you can only store so many maps. And even when you do pay, you can only store so many maps. It's just more maps. And so whenever anything changes, a lot of people don't like it. We've seen this before, right? New operating system for the phone. Oh my God, this is terrible. What did they do? I can't do anything anymore. And then 2 weeks later, it's just normal. And then if they go back to the old OS, they're like, this was terrible. How did we ever live with this? I mean, that's a phenomenon. That's a thing that happens. But I don't think that's what's happening here, because it has been months since the new app has been out. And I think what a lot of people have done is they've gone to the new app and then went back to the old app. But the old app is dead now. If you have it on your phone, go ahead and try it. You'll start the app and it'll just die. So I'm going to read this one review by JKLOIUJ8. So Jacluey8 or JCluey8, I don't know. Anyway, this person summed it up like this. The original was perfect, never let me down. I'm a full-time traveler, and waking up in the morning and spending 2 minutes to figure out where to stay the next night was super easy. Now I'm expected to download new areas every time I want to move just to look for another place. And you have to subscribe if you want to download more. Especially if people have data plans that throttle, downloading may not be possible. Even if they take down the original, I will never switch to iOverlander 2. And that's a fairly typical comment for what people are facing here. So, I now see that I have a mission that I have to find a new app and start reviewing apps for you guys. And there's a lot of articles about this. I mean, if you need something right away, go ahead and search best apps for van life in Google, and you'll find a whole bunch of stuff. But I want to do it as well, so I will be doing that as I'm able, as I'm back on the road to do real life testing. However, all is not lost. iOverlander, the website, actually seems to be working pretty well. Although it's a little tricky, you have to know how to get to it. It's ioverlander.com/explore. You don't just go to iOverlander and see the map like you do with so many of the other apps. So when you go to ioverlander.com right now, it looks like it's gone. Depending on the size of your screen, all you see is stuff for the apps. But if you scroll down a little bit, there is an Explore the Map button. And that interface is great. I mean, that's what I will be using going forward. I'm just going to delete the app, and that's the end of the app for me. And I feel bad because this is a great service, and I would be totally happy to support them financially in some way, but I can't support them financially for a product that is less than it used to be. Also, just to be clear, I'm going to read the developer response to this. The developer responded to that comment and said, "Hi, thanks for your feedback. The downloads of places are very small, usually less than 5 megabytes per country state. Maybe you give us a second chance sometime. IO2, as they're shortening it, provides a lot of features our legacy app doesn't." And this is the part that gets me. Like favorites, different map styles to choose from, dark mode, just to name a few, safe travels. Well, favorites I can see as useful, but honestly, different map styles and dark mode are not really that important. Those are not things that I would pay $60 a month for, I can tell you that. So I think the developers have missed the mark here. I hope they can somehow get back onto it. But in the meantime, the website is the place to go. Okay, another piece of news, the eVito, if you're from the US, you may not know what I'm talking about. If you're from everywhere else, you know that an eVito is Mercedes' small van that was sold in the US as the Metris. It is no longer sold in the US at all, but in Europe, the eVito is a fairly common sight. It is an electric version of the Vito, which, if we had them in the US, would be an electric version of the Metris. And I've often said that electric vans are coming and electric built-out vans are coming, but range is a huge problem. Well, people are working on that, and the eVito now has a much longer range. It has a range of up to 300 miles. And I'm like, that's getting there. I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty close to the range of my NV200 gasoline engine, and I traveled all over the country in that, so I can no longer say, well, the range prevents me from traveling. Now, yes, it's a lot easier to find a gas station than a charger. In the U.S. right now, charging is weird because the government is shutting down some charging stations. Others are being vandalized. It's a mess over here, honestly. But in the rest of the world, like if you were going to travel Europe, yeah, I really think you could do a lot with an eVito. Now, all my caveats about Mercedes are still true. I think they're overcomplicated vehicles, and I'm sure that's true in the U.S. I'm sure that's true in Europe as it is in the U.S. But Mercedes are different in Europe. It's not that the vehicles are materially different. It's how they're perceived and where you can find people to work on them. It's much easier over there, and Mercedes trucks are not seen as luxury items like they are in the US. So if you're in Europe, this could be a thing. Now there are other vans like this in Europe. The Renault Master E-Tech does 285 and the Ford E-Transit does 249, which that is a vehicle we have in the US. But yeah, 300's getting there. So the next question is, how long does it take to charge? And they say it comes with an 11 kilowatt onboard AC charger, so you can, plug it in at home and it'll take a long time, but sure, it'll charge up. Or it'll go from 10 to 80 at a DC rapid charger in 40 minutes. So that's pretty good. So all the same stuff about the pros and cons of EVs apply, but this is a step forward, and I'm happy about that. And heck, it's a little bit of good news in a podcast filled with mostly bad news. I'm sorry. And speaking of bad news, well, I don't know if it's bad news, but if you are from the US and you wish to visit Europe and the UK, it's not as easy as it used to be. There have been a whole lot of new regulations about new visas or things that are like visas but aren't visas. For example, if you go to the UK, you've got to fill out this ETA thing. It costs about, I think it's £10. And it's the same as a visa. They don't call it a visa, but you fill out all your stuff and it lets you come in the country. And they've had some issues with that. At first, it was even if you're just changing planes at Heathrow, you still need to fill this out. It appears they've backed off on that. But I'm organizing a trip to Norway in June, and everybody is flying into Heathrow because the boat actually leaves from Southampton. And yet they've all got to fill this out. So we're going through that. But all of Europe is going to have this soon. So I have a link in the show notes that explains a lot of the changes, but things are going so rapidly, that's not what's important. What's important is that you should know that if you're leaving the U.S., or if you're from Canada and you're coming to the U.S., there have been a lot of changes lately, and you really need to look to make sure you have the proper documents. This used to be just not a thing. You used to, there were certain countries you didn't even think about it, but the world has changed. You do need to worry about documentation basically anywhere you're going. Resource recommendation. Okay, as promised, Rock the Smurf sent me a great list of places to find remote work. Now, this is obviously one of the biggest barriers to van life, is people need to support themselves, and how the heck do you do that if you're on the road? Well, there are still remote jobs, and there will always be remote jobs. I mean, I understand the federal government in the United States has basically eliminated remote jobs, even though there's not enough office space for people. They've actually said, okay, everyone has to come back to the office, and then everyone comes back to the office, and there's 150 people and 50 desks, and they're all just standing around like, what do you want us to do? That aside, there will always be remote jobs. There are jobs that are perfectly suited for remoteness, and the trick for you, ambitious van lifer, is to find these jobs, and Rock the Smurf is helping out here. So thank you, Rock the Smurf. We appreciate it. He sent me a lovely email, and he says, I help Indian professionals in the USA land jobs. No hacks, just super common sense. And I think that's great. So he has 11 remote job portals that he uses. He says these are high paying. There's Amazon Work, which it's really easy. You sign up and then you can instantly start working. But some of these things that you do for work pay really low. I mean, you can work for a couple hours and make $4. So yeah, but let's see what he's got. And I'm going to have a link to all these in the show notes. So I'm not going to read the URLs unless they're really easy. So if you're interested in any of these, come to the show notes and you'll find all the links. But number one, he says, we work remotely. One of the largest platforms for remote jobs across tech, marketing, design, and more. So, okay, I don't know anything about it, but it sounds good. Number two, FlexJobs. Curated, scam-free remote job listings, but requires a paid subscription. Now, I like that, honestly. Yeah, you want things to be free and you want to save money, but the fact that there's a paid subscription means that someone can be held accountable, and I would give that a try if I were looking for a remote job. Remember, this is a very important thing. It is worth investing something into it to get the right thing. So my thought is, and I haven't tried it, but my thought is that because it requires a paid subscription, you may find higher quality jobs there. Also, there's a real phenomenon that if you are looking to hire an employee, with the internet and the way jobs are applied for these days, it's very easy to get flooded. You can get 5,000 applications, and nobody can handle going through 5,000 applications. It's just not possible. So if a paid portal limits those applications to the people who are the most serious about it, that's a good thing for employers too. So I think that is something I would quickly look at. Number three is called Remote OK, a remote job board with salaries listed up front and job filters for easy searching. Sounds pretty good. Number four, Remote.co focuses on fully remote companies that have a strong remote culture. That's just Remote.co. Number five, Jobspresso, high quality remote jobs in tech, marketing, and customer support. Jobspresso. Okay. Remotive. All these clever names. A remote job board with company reviews and job categories that pay well. And that's just remotive.io. Just Remote helps you find fully remote jobs with visibility on international opportunities. So that's something to look at. Number 8, Virtual Vocations, a U.S.-focused site with telecommuting job opportunities. Number 9, Outsourcely. Connect job seekers with startups looking for remote talent. Number 10, Skip the Drive. Offers remote jobs across industries with easy filtering. Number 11, AngelList. Great for landing high-paying remote jobs at startups. Note the word angel there. If you are familiar with the concept of angel investors, well, this will be a startup situation, and having worked for several startups, I can tell you it is intense. Startups are crazy, but one of those startups I worked at was America Online, and that was a very good thing that I did. So there you go. So anyway, thank you very much to Rock the Smurf, also known as Shintan. I hope I said your name correctly. That is a great list. Now, again, I have not vetted any of these personally, and some of the links I will be putting up are LinkedIn links, so I exercise your normal caution as you look through these. But if you're looking for a remote job, cast your net broadly because the fish are not as plentiful as they once were. Product review. I am spending way too much time in chairs, and that means I'm at a computer, and that means I can click on Amazon and I can just buy things on a whim, and that's not necessarily a good thing, but it's helping to curb my frustration. On that note, I can actually walk now. Well, at least I've upgraded myself to a hobble. So I am driving again against doctor's orders, which I don't advise, but, do as I say, not as I do, and it feels good. But I'm hoping to get down to Tiki Bagel Land soon and actually start doing the life I want to be doing. But in the meantime, I'm going to browse Amazon and buy things I don't need. And one of those things is this thing. It's a Drok, D-R-O-K, USB monitor, I guess you would call it. Backing up a step here, if you're doing van life, one of the very first tools you should buy is a multimeter. This is an electric little box that lets you test voltage and amperage and resistance and a whole bunch of other things if you take the time to learn how to use it. Everyone should have one. It's an essential piece of equipment not only for troubleshooting and installation, but also for safety, because when something's going wrong, it's the tool that's probably going to tell you what's going wrong if it's electrical. Bring that over to the USB world, and this is sort of the same thing. It's not anywhere near as powerful, but it's a little tiny black box, maybe the size of some Wrigley's chewing gum, little different, but pretty close. And it has two cables coming out of it. One of them is USB-A, and one of them is USB-C. And then it also has two ports. One of them, as you might have guessed, is USB-C and USB-A. And you plug this device into your charger, your computer, wherever your USB power is coming from, and then you plug your device that you're charging into it. So right now, I have this plugged into my computer, and I have my iPhone plugged into the little box, and I am getting a readout of what's going on. So for example, I can see that the USB port is putting out 5.16 volts, 5.15 volts. That's pretty good. And that it is putting out 0.5 amps, which is pretty low, and I'll talk about why in a second. And that over time, my iPhone has absorbed 695 amp, I actually don't know, amp seconds? Amp minutes? It's not minutes. Might be seconds. I don't know, but that is a capacitance measure. I know that. So this thing is a PD device, meaning that it obeys power delivery specs. And basically, you can monitor your USB ports with it. It has an LED display, 2 rows, top one's red, top one's blue, and it has a bunch of different modes where it'll show just voltage, or you can show voltage and amperage, or you can have it do a flip display thing where it shows voltage, amperage, and capacitance, which is basically how much power has flowed through the device. So you can test your USB ports with it. If you have a USB port that sometimes when you plug in your phone it doesn't charge, this device will tell you if it is the device or the cable or whatever. It just gives you the data. You can just see it and you can see that the voltage works. There are a whole bunch of these things on Amazon. They range in price from $10 to $50. This one's about 16. And I picked this one because it has cables. I don't like cantilevers. Cantilever is when you have an object sticking out in the air, and that provides a lot of leverage on where it plugs into your device. In my experience, it's really easy for those to break, and they put a lot of strain on ports. This one, because it has cables built into it, has no cantilever, and I think it's going to be a much safer long-term device. You could leave this plugged in all the time. So that's why I picked this one, and I'm very happy with it. It's doing exactly what I wanted, and now I can test the output of things. Now, why is my super fancy iPhone 14 Pro Max, whatever the heck it's called, only drawing 0.5 amps, which if you know something about how phones charge, that's very little. That's like what the original iPhones drew. And it's because my phone is 97% charged. Phones have a charging profile with their lithium batteries, just like the lithium batteries do in your van. And my phone has entered the last stage of charging, where it's just taking a little bit of amperage just to top it off. And that's why it's so low. If my phone were dead or like 10% or whatever and I plugged it in, that amperage would be much higher. And that's one of the PD specs. You can change your amperage and voltage depending. One drawback from this is that it doesn't seem to send data through. Now, the way I have my desk set up here, my laptop is connected to a hub that provides power and hooks up to an external display, and I thought, oh, I'll just plug that in, I'll be able to monitor all this power I'm using, and yeah, it didn't do that. It won't send the data through, so my monitor doesn't turn on and I can't really use it that way. So if you're in a data situation, it's not going to really help you, but if you're just looking at power, it's a pretty good little thing. So link in the show notes. It is the Drok USB Tester USB-A USB-C 2.0. That's the one that I think you should get. It is also Amazon's choice. Woohoo! And yeah, I've got a link in the show notes. You want the one with the cables, folks, and it should have a USB-A and a USB-C cable, both, because that's going to be the most flexible and it's going to give you the most longevity. But boy, there are a whole bunch of other options too. Tales from the road. Okay, so because I'm saying bad things about the US right now, I thought I'd have to say a good thing. Because, well, let's face it, there's politics, there's what's in the news. The news is always going to highlight the worst parts of things, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think things are pretty bad right now. That is absolutely how things are. This isn't just the news. This isn't just politics as normal. I think things are bad, okay? But that said, that is a macro view. In the micro view, where you're dealing with just some other humans who are around you, things haven't really changed that much, and generally, things are still pretty good. Now, this story is from a few years ago, But I don't think this would be any different if it happened today. So the Tiki Bago, if you've listened to the podcast for a while, I've talked about this a lot. It's a 1973 Winnebago Indian D20, or is it D22? I think it's a D22. And somebody converted it into a tiki shack, basically. It's all done up inside, like it looks like you're walking into Hawaii when you go into this thing. It's got grass walls, and there's a ukulele on the wall, and there's all kinds of tiki idols. And anyway, it's fun. I like it. We've used it for a few years, and my wife fell in love with it, even though I showed it to her only as a joke. She said, no, we have to have that. So I flew all the way to Grants Pass, Oregon, picked the thing up, and I needed to get it back to Illinois. And I got a job thing to do, an assignment, I guess you'd call it, up in Montana, in Billings. And I'm like, well, it's not exactly on the way, but it's not that far off the way when you're driving that many miles. So I was like, okay. So I took the thing, started driving, instantly broke down. That's not the story, but that is a story. And then got to Billings, did the stuff I had to do there, and then left and drove east and had all kinds of adventures. But one of the adventures I had was I was driving through really remote Montana, and the fuel filter started to act up. Now, like many of these old Winnebagos, this Winnebago had been sitting for a while before the guy I bought it from had converted it. And so he had done his best to clean out the two fuel tanks, and he had done a really good job on one. He said the other one was much harder, and because there's two fuel tanks, I imagine that one just got neglected. They never used it. So he said, hey, you know, this tank's good, this tank's not so good. But I'm driving these really long distances, and this thing does not get a whole lot of gas mileage. It might even get like gallons per mile. It's big, huge Dodge 413 in the thing. You can hear when you sound it up, it does that's a gallon, that's a gallon, that's a gallon, that's a gallon. That's kind of how the engine sounds. And yeah, so I didn't want to have to stop for gas every 100 miles. So I used both tanks. It was just a switch on the dash to switch between tanks. And I noticed on the second tank that at some points, if I switched to the second tank, it would kind of stutter. And it was, you know, it was a carbureted vehicle. It's pretty old. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'd switch it back, and then it would get fresh gas, and you know, everything would be fine. Until I got to this remote place in Montana, where I knew I had a long way to go before the next gas station. And it started to do the chugging thing, and I was like, uh-oh. So I switched it, and then I noticed I was on the good tank. The only thing I could do was switch it to the bad tank, and that wasn't going to help. But I did, because I had no other choice. And then finally it got so bad that I had to pull over. And I was like, what am I going to do? I'm in the middle of Montana, don't even have cell phone signal, and I'm in this beast. And now, fortunately, the previous owner had included some extra fuel filters, which was very nice of him. And not only because I had the extra fuel filters, but also because I knew what fuel filters I needed. So I had the information to find some somewhere. But I had this vehicle takes 3 fuel filters, and I had 2. So I crawled under there, and I managed to put one on. It was, you know, one of these roadside repairs, and I didn't have the proper tools and anything. And an 18-wheeler pulls up and stops. Now, an 18-wheeler, that guy's got a schedule. He's got a giant vehicle. He pulled over to make sure I was okay. And I said, yeah, you know, it's just a fuel filter. I can do it from here, and thanks for the help. And he said, well, look, so you know, I travel this route all the time, and just about 400 yards back, there's a mechanic. Now, you can't really see it. It's set back, but they're really nice folks. I'd bet they'd be willing to help you out. And I was like, wow, thank you. So first off, thank you to the truck driver. While he didn't directly help me replace the fuel filter, he gave me a really key piece of information. And then also, wow, that was some real luck. And if I were a religious person, I might think, thank you. But I'm not. So I thought, whew, that was lucky. Anyway, I get the fuel filter on, but I'm not sure things are right. So I'm like, you know what? I'm here. There's a mechanic right here. I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity. So I hop in the rig, start it up, turn around, and go back. And I drive into this mechanic shop, and there's nobody there. I'm like, oh, no, this isn't going to work. But then this kid comes out from back, and he's wearing those really flimsy gym shorts, no shoes, and no shirt. And he comes over, and he's like, hey, how's it going? And really friendly. I guess he was like 14. I don't know. And I'm like, well, I'm looking for the mechanic. I've got this problem. And he says, oh, all right, let me take a look. Yeah, the kid's the mechanic. Or at least one of them. But I'm like, well, he may know more about this than I do, even though I'm the same age as the engine, and he's probably, he was born in the age of fuel injection, so I'm a little confused as how he would know very much about this engine. But so he crawls under, and he crawls under there with no shirt. No, he doesn't, no cardboard or anything. He just crawls right under there. And I was like, well, wait, let me get you something. And he's like, no, it's all right. I do this all the time. He crawls under there, looks and says, oh, okay, found your fuel filters. And, well, this one that looks new is on backwards. I'm like, okay, that's the one I did. Oops. And so he says, do you have any more? And I gave him the fuel filters I had. And he spent an hour under there moving them around and fixing them and making them work. And then after I'm like, dude, thank you so much. You have saved me. Like, I'm so impressed and so pleased that you came out and saved me like this. And he said, oh, yeah, that's all right. Don't worry about it. I was like, so what do I owe you? And he said, no, you don't owe me anything. That's all right. This is just a fuel filter. I'm like, no, this kid just spent an hour under this grimy, oil-leaking beast of a vehicle. He's going to get something. But he refused. He would not take anything. And so I approached it a little different. I started asking him about himself and about, where we were. And he said that we were actually on an Indian reservation. And as it happened, we were on the Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation, not one of the biggest ones in Montana, but that's where we were. We were near Lame Deer, if you know Montana geography at all. Lame Deer on Route 272, which, if you look, you can see it's pretty remote up there. But he told me about, life on the reservation and how they had all these services and how things were pretty good and stuff. And I'm thinking, how do I was honestly very nervous because I'm like, here I am, big white guy from Chicago, talking to the little Indian boy. It just felt wrong somehow. But I was trying very much to actually learn about what life was like here. Because, even though this is the country that I am from, the Indian Reservation's a different country in a way, and they have different customs and practices. And the history between the two has been pretty awful. And this other guy comes out of the building finally, and he's dressed like a security guard, and I don't actually know what his role was, but he's very friendly. So say, hey, how's it going? He's just trying to see what's going on, and we start talking. And then I find out that in the building there's a desk, and there are some women behind the desk, and they are the ones who run the office for this mechanic shop. And I said, oh, I'm just going to go talk with them a bit. And I went in there, and I basically explained what had just happened, and they're like, oh yeah, he always does that, he's just a good kid. And I'm like, I appreciate that. He will not take any money, but he saved me so much. The very least I can do is to give him this. And I took a $100 bill out, which I had a lot of $100 bills because I knew this trip was going to be like this, and I put it on the counter and I said, thank you so much. And I did not give them a chance to give it back. I just kind of started walking away. And I mean, think about this now. If you're somebody who watches a lot of Hollywood movies, I set up a freaking horror movie scenario there. Stranger in a strange land, in need. There's a movie called Breakdown that was almost the same situation where the truck driver stops but people aren't like the movies. People are actually generally good folks, and the folks on this Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation they could not have been any nicer, and they really didn't have any reason to be other than that's how they are. It was inspiring, honestly, and it changed me in that I want to be more like them, and I try to be, but it's hard. There's just all kinds of complexities in the world right now. But one of the thoughts I have about all this is to, at least from time to time, make your world smaller. These folks in this Indian reservation are isolated. They have themselves. They're a small community. And if you think about how humanity evolved, we evolved in small groups. That's where we function the best. When we're in these massive groups of 330 million people, for example, a lot of that falls apart. And it's important to take a step back and put yourself in those small group moments and realize that, you know what? People are pretty cool. And van life gives you an opportunity to do that. If you go to a van life gathering, Schoolie-Palooza, Van Fest, Peace, Love, and Vans, on and on and on, you will find that same thing. Nearly everyone you meet is going to be a pretty cool person. So all the stuff that's going on in the news right now, all these horrible things that are happening, yes, all that is real. We absolutely need to pay attention to it and do what we can to stop it. But that doesn't mean everyone's bad. In fact, it's actually the opposite. A place to visit. So, given all that, maybe you're from the US, and maybe you would rather not be. Or maybe you would rather just leave for a while. Whatever the case may be. My wife and I are approaching retirement age, or at least the time when we're supposed to be planning for retirement, and we're looking at our options. We may not actually stay in the U.S., and we've looked at a bunch of places. Right now we're focusing on Malta, because Malta has a lot of what we're looking for, and I've been there. I love Malta. I would be fine living there permanently. That may not be the case for you, but there may be something for you. So if you are in the U.S., and this is actually true for worldwide, I have an article for you from CN Traveler, that's Condé Nast Traveler, and the article has 66 countries with a thing called the Digital Nomad Visa. These visas are typically fairly easy to get, and they're designed for people who work remotely and can live anywhere and do their jobs. And these let you come and stay in their country. Now, it's not citizenship. Citizenship's a separate thing. This allows you to live there legally. But I'm just going to very quickly go through this list of countries that do have digital nomad visas. Okay, you ready? 66 of these. United Arab Emirates, Albania, Anguilla, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Armenia, Aruba, Australia, Bahamas, Indonesia, Bali specifically, Barbados, Belize, Bermuda, Brazil, Cabo Verde, Cayman Islands, Colombia, Costa Rica, Croatia, Curacao, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Dominica, Ecuador, Egypt, El Salvador, Estonia, France, Georgia, Germany, India, Goa specifically, Greece, Grenada, Hungary, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Malaysia, Malta, Mauritius, Land of the Dodo, Mexico, Montenegro, Montserrat, Namibia, Netherlands, New Zealand, North Macedonia, Norway, Panama, Peru, Portugal. I'm going there soon and I'm getting stuck on the pronunciation. Puerto Rico, Romania, St. Lucia, Serbia, the Seychelles, South Africa, South Korea, Spain, Sri Lanka, Taiwan, Thailand, Turkey, and Vietnam. And folks, if any of those places sound like a place you would like to live for a while, well, they have a digital nomad program for you. As far as getting your van there, well, we might have to have a longer talk about that. But yeah, you have options. And you do need to do your research. I know that Malta's digital nomad program was very popular, and now there's some pushback, and a lot of people came in, and the rents have gotten different. And anyway, every country has its issues. There's no question about that. You absolutely have to do a lot of research before you decide to make the move to do this. But I just want you to know it's an option. So take a look at this article. It's in Condé Nast Traveler. It's from last year. And that could be the start for you living in a whole new exciting life that you never thought of. Well, folks, thank you for listening to this mixed episode as far as emotions go. I appreciate your patience putting up with me. Music, as always, is by Simon Wagg, and if you need to get a hold of me for any reason, I am Jeff at Built to Go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. Until next time, remember the words of Anonymous. Hard truth. If you wait until you feel better to start living, you might be waiting forever. Go live your life. Do it sad. Do it anxious. Do it uncertain. Because healing doesn't always come before the experience. Sometimes the experience is what heals you. Even if it doesn't, you'll have lived a life.